AI is not just changing technology, it is redesigning reality itself, perhaps pushing us into a new civilizational phase. So here is the question: what kind of education will we have in 20 years? Let me start a prediction series. Education 2050. My first prediction: AI may trigger the biggest educational renaissance in centuries. And I mean renaissance in its original sense, bringing the human back to the center. Because let's be honest, if AI can explain concepts better than textbooks, personalize learning endlessly, then education must ask a very uncomfortable question. What remains uniquely human? Do we still need teachers? Do we still need textbooks? Yes, but not for the reasons we once did. Teachers will matter more than ever, not as transmitters of information, but as navigators of uncertainty, ethical guides, creators of dialogue, adults who help children remain human in an intelligent machine age. And textbooks, not information containers, maps, frameworks, questions, systems to think with, spaces between the known and unknown. So my prediction is this: AI will not make education less human. Next reel, prediction 2. What if schools lose their walls? Follow us. If AI radically changes what education is for, then schools as we know them may stop making sense. So here's my second prediction. Schools may lose their walls. And I don't mean schools will disappear. I mean something far more radical. We may stop taking children out of life in order to prepare them for life. Think about how strange our model is. We separate children by age, put them into classrooms, divide reality into subjects, and call that preparation for the real world. But real life doesn't work like that. Real life happens in laboratories, on farms, in companies, in communities, in design studios, in hospitals, in scientific institutes. Life is messy, connected, unpredictable, human. So my prediction? Learning will increasingly move into real systems. Children working on environmental projects, collaborating with scientists, learning inside production spaces, solving real human problems. And schools? Schools may become something completely different. Not containers for learning, but hubs for dialogue, reflection, meaning-making, creation. Because education may stop being preparation for life and become life itself. And next comes the most uncomfortable prediction. What if the biggest mistake in education was fragmenting reality itself? In the last reel, I said schools may lose their walls. But what if the deeper problem was never the walls? What if the biggest mistake in education was fragmenting reality itself? Think about how absurd this is. Life does not arrive as mathematics at 9 a.m., science at 10, humanities at 11. Reality does not separate itself like that. We do. Life comes as systems, messy, connected, unpredictable, human. And since from childhood we train children to think in fragments, separate subjects, separate knowledge, separate answers, as if understanding means cutting reality into pieces. And then we do something even stranger. We separate children by age, same pace, same lessons, same expectations. But where exactly does real life work like that? It doesn't. In real life, you learn from people older than you. You learn from people younger than you. You work with people who think differently. Challenge your assumptions. That is where systems thinking is born. Not in silence, not in isolation, not in educational boxes, but in dialogue, difference, shared responsibility, real collaboration. So my prediction: future education will stop organizing learning around fragmented subjects and start organizing it around living systems. Children will think together, work together, build together. In the last predictions, I suggested that learning may move beyond the classroom and into real life, and that education may stop dividing reality into separate subjects and start exploring living systems. But this changes something fundamental. For centuries, education was built around the individual. Individual knowledge, individual answers, individual achievement. But once learning enters real life, that is no longer enough. You cannot solve complex problems alone. You cannot build communities alone. You cannot participate in a living system alone. My prediction, the future of education will move from individual achievement to collective participation. Children will work on real projects, in teams, in communities, with responsibilities that matter. They will learn how to create dialogue, how to resolve conflicts, how to build trust, how to make decisions together, how to contribute their strengths to something larger than themselves. And perhaps for the first time, these will not be called soft skills. They will become part of the core curriculum. For centuries, education asked, what can you do alone? The future may ask, what can you create together? And that brings us to the next prediction. If education changes this much, how should we assess it? In the last prediction, I suggested that education may move from individual achievement to collective participation. Children may learn through real projects, in teams, in communities, developing dialogue, responsibility, and collaboration. But if education begins to value different things, shouldn't assessment change too? How do we recognize growth? How do we know learning is happening? And that leads to a deeper question. Why do we assess at all? Think about it. For centuries, assessment was designed to judge, to compare, to rank, to decide who is ahead and who is behind. And perhaps that made sense in a different world. But if education is about growth, about participation, about learning in real life, then assessment must serve a different purpose. My prediction? Assessment will move from judgment to development. Its role will no longer to label a learner. Its role will be to help a learner grow, to understand strengths, to identify challenges, to find the next step. Because the most important question is not how good are you, but what do you need to move forward. And that changes everything. Assessment stops being a verdict. It becomes guidance. It stops looking only at the past. It starts helping shape the future. And that brings us to the next prediction. What if the most important person evaluating your growth is you? In the last prediction, I suggested that assessment may move from judgment to development. But this raises an even bigger question. Who is responsible for development? Think about it. For years, children are taught to look outside themselves, for grades, for approval, for feedback, for someone else to tell them whether they are doing well. And then one day they enter life. And suddenly there is no answer key, no correct answer, no teacher standing beside them. Do you see the contradiction? We spend years teaching people to depend on external evaluation and then expect them to navigate uncertainty on their own. My prediction? One of the most important goals of future education will be helping children develop an inner compass. The ability to pause and ask, what am I doing well? Where am I struggling? What is my next step? How can I become better? Because self-awareness is not automatic. Reflection is not automatic. Honesty with yourself is not automatic. These are skills, and they can be learned. They should be learned. Perhaps one day, one of the most important questions in education will not be, what grade did you get? But, do you understand yourself well enough to keep growing? Because life will not always give us feedback. Sometimes we must learn to become our own guide. And that brings us to the next prediction. How do you assess learning when the project is real? What if the biggest problem with assessment is that it happens outside the reality we are trying to improve? Think about it. We say education should prepare children for life, for work, for communities, for solving real problems. But then we remove them from that reality and assess them somewhere else. A test, an exam, a score. What if that no longer makes sense? Over the last 6 predictions, I described a different future. Children learning in scientific institutes, community projects, environmental initiatives, and other real environments. Exploring systems instead of isolated subjects. Working in teams instead of learning mostly alone. developing not only knowledge but also dialogue, responsibility, reflection, and the ability to contribute. If education changes this much, assessment cannot stay the same. My final prediction: assessment will become contextual. A scientific investigation should be assessed differently from a community project, a social initiative differently from the engineering solution. And increasingly, we will look not only to what students know, but at what their work actually creates. Because when the project is real, the question changes not what grade did you get, but what changed because of your work. Perhaps the future of education is not about preparing children for life. Perhaps it's about allowing them to participate in life from the very beginning.